And we are now live. Hey guys, for anybody who's there, as usual, we're doing our Corona Matt Haycock Show podcast specials in lockdown. So we're streaming live onto YouTube, we're streaming live onto Facebook, and Leonard, who I've got with me, Leonard Sekyonda, is also doing it live on his Instagram. Are you doing it live on your Instagram? So we're in more destinations than we've ever been now. So guys, I will, as usual, if you want to ask some questions in the comment box, please go for it. And where appropriate, I will slip them in to the conversation in some kind of chronological order. So if I don't get back to you immediately or at all, don't be offended. I just got to try and keep some flow to this for the recorded version thereafter. So hello, Chantel. Nice to see you. Thanks for dropping by. Right, buddy. You good to go?
I'm good to go.
Let's do it. Hey guys, it's Matt Haycock here, and today I have got with me Leonard Sekyonda. Now, Leonard has faced many frustrations through his life, including the death of his father, experiencing a serious eye condition as a child. He's been involved in gangs as a teen. He's dropped out of college. He's even seen his friend stabbed in front of his eyes. But despite these challenges, Leonard set up multiple international businesses. He's now an author, he's traveled the world, and he's now passionate about helping others to pivot their frustrations into positive growth and opportunity. Also, since then, Leonard's co-founded a tech startup called MYCOMEUP in early 2009. MYCOMEUP World is a social network that matches freelancers, entrepreneurs, and creatives, and it now boasts over 127,000 global users. He has his own podcast. He also now has his own exclusive webinar series in which participants learn practical business advice, tips, mindset, motivation, and success. And Leonard's goal now is to use his story of race, identity, frustration, rejection, and failure as an example of how to transform frustration and pain into positive growth. Now, I know a lot of my audience, message me every day to telling me the various pains that they're struggling from. Obviously not necessarily completely parallel to some of the background that Leonard talks about. But any kind of pain and frustration that can be pivoted into positivity and entrepreneurialism, I'm sure, is the kind of stuff that Leonard's going to talk to us about. I've just realised I've had so much to say about you, Leonard, that we're almost out of time. Thank
you for that introduction. It's a really nice introduction.
Listen, thanks for being here, buddy. And yeah, I guess let's go back to the beginning, really, and tell us about your background. And I think normally when I ask people to start from the beginning and talk about the background, I'm really just wanting to set the scene and contextualize themselves for where they are today. But I think with you, I'd kind of like to understand your mindset shifts as you go along as well. Obviously, being a gang member, watching somebody be stabbed, etc. I'm interested to know kind of where your head was. Were you happy being in a gang at the time? Did you sometime make a mindset shift and realize it wasn't a good thing to be in a gang, or were you doing things against your will? So go for it, my man.
Yeah, so just to kind of touch on the start, I think for me, when I initially started my journey, it was a very small perspective that I held in regards to the world, society, what was out there, and the environment which I grew up in. Having lost my dad when I was 8 years old, was in London. We have the council estates. It was more of a council benefit kind of system, so that environment was conducive to people that were more on the lower end of the economy, and that kind of reflected the people I was associating with as a young kid and a teenager. I think for me, the thing about my eye condition is that I used to have to go to the hospital pretty much 2 times a week because I had spokes around my eyes, which they were investigating. They couldn't tell if it was going to turn me blind or if they needed to put me on steroids. So my attendance was horrible. Like I think when it came to the end of the year, I really had bad attendance. So when I actually applied for secondary schools, no schools accepted me. So I actually went to the worst secondary school you can go to in London at the time. It was a school you go to when you don't get into any when your grades are low, and basically all the kids that have been like excelled or been bad end up going. And my reason was not because of my ability, but actually because of my attendance score. So I kind of was automatically in an environment where I knew my intelligence was more, but my circumstance put me in it. So I was never proud about going to this school. I was never an advocate of going to a school which was beneath my intelligence, but it was just a circumstance. And if I'm honest, when you're, you know, how old was I? When you're 12, 13, you're not sitting there thinking about collecting all of your doctor's letters to give in to help your attendance level. So it wasn't something that I was seeing as at some point going to become a consequence. But as a consequence of it, I found myself in an environment which was very hostile. We were in a school which I think kind of congregated some of the most affected kids in the South London region. And I think the cause of that were a lot of the students who were coming from backgrounds where, you know, they were living with their grandma, or they had come from Jamaica or come from Africa, or, you know, you had Bangladesh kids that had been coming from Pakistan as well. So it was a real cultured, but at the same time very empty, emotional schooling environment where I think people were all expressing themselves with anger and with rage. And for me, my initial kind of step into essentially trying to not be involved in the gang side of, you know, the gang side of life, but it was to kind of protect myself. I think I went down the music avenue, which was to MC, and that was a place where I found myself being able to flourish and, you know, still become popular and build my reputation in the school. But as every musician does, he creates a group. And, you know, in some instance, that group can become a band. I think in our scenario, it became more of a gang because, you know, music and groups of angry kids become a gang very quickly. So it was always kind of playing the fine line between, you know, trying to be creative, but having this group of friends, which were half of them were musicians and the other half were, you know, involved in, you know, the other part of that environment. And I think for me, I always danced in between the logic of knowing, because I've always known better. I can't, you know, I couldn't identify per se with logic not coming into play whenever I did things, because my mum didn't raise me in that way. Our environment was hostile, but she always raised me with ethics and morals. So even when things were happening around me and I was seeing things happen, I never once agreed to it. And I think my form of creating a path and confidence and my own identity was through the music. So I was building a good reputation as a musician and going on shows like Tim Westwood. But I think inevitably it still kept circling back to it being around, you know, gang area fights and wars and stabbing. So I kind of felt that the whole energy of that environment for me was very hostile. I made it through my GCSEs last minute by a teacher actually helping me out and realizing that I had more in me. And basically pulling me to the side and he started to do extra evening classes with me.
I mean, at this point, you know, what were you thinking your future was? You know, I mean, you know, was there a career or path you were going down, or were you just going through the motions?
It's a good question. I mean, for me at the time, I always knew I was special. I've never not known in my heart that there was something I'm supposed to do that's big. And I think if I look at the time or the period I was in then, I think I was probably thinking I was going to be the next big musician, the next big music artist, I think. And I put all of my passion into that because I wasn't just imagining or dreaming this was going to happen. I was writing songs every evening in the night. I was going home. I was using every pocket money I had to go to the studio. I was, you know, messaging all my favorite music artists that I loved and messaged them every day. So I've always had a compulsive element to me when I get involved in things. So as far as it goes with what I was doing in the music side of things, even though there wasn't really money in music at that time, especially in the grime scene, that was the actual environment, the music genre, I was still very much active, and I was 15, 16, and I was doing things which people were surprised by, because I was even taking trains to West London and doing songs with other musicians. So I was essentially networking as well, like a business person. So I wholeheartedly believe that that's where I was going. But then when I looked deeper into the scenario and realized what kept happening while I was doing it, I realized that this was going to be something which could also involve me in having to get deeper into the dark side of, you know, the music industry and the environment of areas and gang wars. And I think it just got to a point that even when I thought I was doing something to escape it, it was still, my popularity almost heightened the chances of me being attacked or being threatened by different areas, which then made you have to associate yourself with other people that could protect you. So it's almost like a layer cake, right? You come out of it, you come out of your environment, which is school, which is your area, to go into something which is creative, which still has an element of making you popular, which enables you to basically be a target, and you need people to protect you in that target. So I feel like that was something that I personally felt that created a space for me to realize that I had to think a little bit beyond that being a career, at least for my safety, should I say, because there was no money being made. So it's more popularity and increasing my risk at the time, being exposed and popular.
And when did you first? I mean, I was going to say, when did you first move into business? I mean, obviously, the music side of things was probably unintentionally, like you say, unintentionally business orientated. With the skills like networking, etc. When did you make that formal decision to, I guess, leave gang life behind, leave the music behind, and go more mainstream?
Yeah, so I mean,
what made the change?
It was funny because I remember at the time I got a part-time job when as I said, the teacher helped me to get through GCSEs, and I just got into a sixth form. Don't know how I did it, but I got in. And I remember when I got there, I used to have plaits and I used to have like earrings, and I still had the kind of cadence of my old younger self. And I remember I got a part-time job working for like a telesales company called Vauxhall. So we customer service up, asked them if they got their brochure, how they find it. It was quite interesting. But anyway, I remember being so dedicated at that job because I wanted to kind of make some money on the side. And a woman gave me the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And at the same time as this happening, I had a friend of mine who is my best friend now, who was also kind of going into like investment broking at the time. And he was making money, and he was really big on all these motivational CDs like Zig Ziglar and motivational things like that. And it kind of like worked simultaneously. Like he was informing me about the motivational side, and then this woman just came over while I was working, was like, you need to read this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I read. And I found myself, for the first time reading something which talked to me as a human. It talked to me outside of my race, outside of my experience. It kind of provided me with other options. I wasn't taught that I could be a property investor. I wasn't taught that I could be self-employed. I was only taught I could either be an A, B, or C student, and I was only taught that I could either be a doctor, policeman, lawyer. I was never taught the other options. And I feel like the moment that book gave me the quadrants and gave me these other options, which to me had never existed, I was like, well, hold on, I can actually do this. So my first mission was to get a job in a state agency, and I didn't fill that UCAS form out because after reading that book, I was just dead certain that I was going to get my first job in the real estate because I just read about it. And it was in 2008/9 when that big recession was happening, so it was a challenging task to get a job. But after like 4 to 5 rejections, I borrowed another suit from a friend to kind of improve my chances, and ended up getting a job in lettings in Mitcham, which was still 40 minutes from my house, but I was so eager to get the job. And getting into that company enabled me to really learn from the ground up, how the lettings and the sales business works. And for me, having read this book, which was talking about, making opportunities in a bad market, and it was talking about cynics and people being negative and watching people's energies. When I went into the work environment, I remember coming in enthusiastic and ready to improve myself, and people telling me to calm down, that I'm young. But I kind of put it to the side, and I mastered a way of actually beating everybody result wise and actually making the company more business. Because at the time where the recession was really, I'm sure you remember it all over the news. It was, it was horrible. Red lines, recession, prices going down. We used to have landlords calling every day. In fact, like every other hour, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And I remember my job was to be in lettings. So I remember thinking in my head that this was an opportunity. So I tested out with 2 landlords and actually offered to rent their properties out for them instead of selling them. But in fact, what I said to them is that they should rent their properties for anything from 2 to 3 years instead of the standard 12 months. And I got 2 to agree to do it. I found tenants that wanted to have security for 2 to 3 years, and ended up doing two deals, which enabled me to get the commission of a sales contract, because I was getting more than a 12-month commission. I was getting it for 3 years. And just like that, I you know, broke records. I started to make money. I'm 19 now. I've showed the business how to even make more money in this scenario. And we started to do these long-term contracts with properties. And I remember, you know, demanding for them to promote me, because even though I was 18/19, when I was between 18 and 19, I remember them not being quite hesitant. So I made up this predicament and said, a company offered me a job which hadn't, and I said, I don't get a promotion, I'm going to leave. And I remember them, essentially they came up with the offer, said they're going to give me a car and a pay rise, but that didn't happen. They gave me a little bit of a pay rise and no car. And the worst thing you can do to an 18/19-year-old is promise him a car and him not get it. So it was that day that I decided that I'm going to leave this company and start my own one. So I had saved up some money, and I started my first. I got a workspace which was in South Wimbledon. It's kind of like an ex-local building, and set up my first estate agency called KeyMove Relocations, KeyMove Estate Agents. That was my first business, and it came, like I said, once. And if you look at the flow of everything, it's always been frustration. I was frustrated at the time and I know I brought all this value to this business. I had been enthusiastic and shown the same person that told me to calm down and that I was being over the top. I had shown him how to increase his commissions through the new method that I brought to the business. Yet because of my age, they didn't want to promote me. It was very clear that I was the leader, I was the teacher, I was helping everyone. And that frustration, I just, instead of, you know, sitting there and mulling around and minimizing my value, I took my value elsewhere and gave it back to myself.
So obviously, you know, you've taken frustration in a very positive way, and obviously it's, you know, it's done great things for you for your life. I guess, you know, the stereotype or probably the, you know, the majority of frustrated people probably don't get to use that frustration in a positive way. You know, they either, you know, live a life of, let's say best case, live a life of grumpiness and irritated and regret because, you know, they're frustrated at being able to move things forward, or potentially, you know, people from you know, from a worse background use that frustration and go off in completely the other direction, and and turn to lives of crime and certainly not positive things. You know, in terms of actual tactics, techniques, you know, methodology, how are you using your experience now to, you know, to help people who are suffering frustration and take it in a positive manner and not let things go wrong?
Very good question, Matt. Yeah, and it's true. And I saw it firsthand, people that were frustrated using that energy and using it to harm people. And as I got older, I've seen people use that same energy and use it to sabotage themselves, whether that's through drugs, whether that's through alcohol, whether that's through depression. And one of the things that I learned along the way, especially when I was first, because I think my initial usage of the frustration, it was productive, but at the same time, it was still very disruptive, because it was frustration without structure. It was just, I want more. I didn't know what more I wanted. I just wanted more. And I think when I first started to attain more, I realized that if I don't have a plan on what it is I want to see over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, then if money is my goal, when I get the money, who am I going to be? And that started to play out. So what I learned was the power of goal setting. And for me, having goals, both short and long term, provided a path for me to have a bit more clarity. In a book I read, which was called Psycho-Cybernetics, which kind of broke down the psychology of the psychology of goals, and how, you know, a lot of people create goals as kind of like a torturing mechanism to beat themselves up. But I create goals in order to win, and to create goals in which I can see a path as to, you know, structuring my thoughts, because a lot of us feel anxiety and a lot of us feel strain, less because of us being, you know, unworthy enough, but really being unclear or not having a real direction. And what goal setting has done, and what I've really mastered over the past few years, is creating clear incremental goals that affect different areas of my life. I have goals that are to do with my love life, my relationships. I have goals that are to do with my spirituality and my health. I have goals to do with my finances. I have goals to do with my friends and family. So it's not just goals which are stimulated off, you know, one trajectory of myself, but it's just monitoring each of these flows and evaluating them at least once a year to see how they've played out, and being okay for them to change and adjust throughout the year. Because, you know, like I said, it's not a disciplinary act. It's more about creating some form of clarity, because I feel like life without the clarity enables there to be an uncertainty, which people then end up, you know, self-harming, sabotaging, or falling into mental health issues, which and in the long run have a negative effect on people.
And what's your advice to people in general in terms of goal settings? I mean, I think, you know, it's a question that, you know, a lot of people have a lot of different answers on. I mean, I for one am very much into stretch goals, but you know, something that's, let's say, a stretch but still attainable to some degree. Obviously, other people advocate for setting fucking mental goals, you know, so that even if you shoot for the stars, you know, and you fail dramatically, you're still halfway in the sky. I mean, what are some of your specific techniques and tactics on goal setting?
Good question. So I actually have a book that I released last year called Become Your Own Hero Again. It's on Amazon. It's become a bestseller, and I actually have an exercise in there that breaks down goals and how to actually write them from short to long term. And the reason I did that is because I felt that this is something that people can add to their day-to-day lives, because goals, like you mentioned, are about winning as opposed to setting a bar that is pretty much impossible to hit. I believe in incremental success, and success being, if my goal was to go for a run 3 times a week, being able to say to myself that I wrote it, did it, and achieved it, and then moving accordingly with that win to actually progress into setting high levels of goals. But I think a lot of people tend to kind of set goals as this benchmark, as opposed to really what goes on in the day-to-day life. If you start setting food goals to cutting out a certain kind of, you know, chocolate or, you know, fried food for that week, and you start to see you wrote it as a goal and you achieve it, you start to create what you call internal confidence. And through internal confidence, that's where you can shoot and aim higher. Like, I call it like the swimming pool effect. If you go to a pool and you have no swimming experience, you just dive in. It's not the fact that you can't swim, but that you're not confident enough to swim. So starting at the shallow end and learning to have the confidence to go in with the armbands, and then to slowly take the armbands off, and then to do that halfway of the pool to the point that you get the confidence internally to know that you can keep yourself above the water when you get to the deep end. And that's what I see goals as. It's not about the ability, but it's about the confidence. So it's just about creating those internal moments within yourself where you start to trust yourself, because half of us are slowed down by the perception. Well, no, most of us are slowed down by the perception we have of ourselves. And when we start to be aware of what we're actually capable of, when we become aware that we're able to say, this week, I'm going to work out 3 times. And I did it. I'm not saying how long. I'm not saying this week I'm going to work out 3 times and do 100 kg each time. Each workout can be 10 minutes, but you said you're going to do 3 workouts, you know, this week, and you did 3 10-minute workouts, and you and yourself know you said it and you did it. And I think that's what it's about, creating that flexibility of just being able to start saying things and then achieving them. And then saying to yourself, I said that, I did it, and I achieved it. And using that as your confidence to move forward into the deeper waters of the goals or the aspirations that you want to achieve later on. So I believe in incremental goal setting. Of course, I love the idea, and I do mention about affirmations in my book. I love the idea of dreaming and imagination, and having a place where you do have your wildest thoughts. But it's impossible to include your wildest thoughts in your day-to-day activities at the same time. It's great to have a page that you go in and you visualize for the next 5 years your greatest life, so you know, so you can start to feel it. But then when we go into the goals and the practical steps we do, we start to make them incremental so that you can actually apply it immediately, and not, you know, when you have that pool at the back of the house or the yacht or the jet that's outside. Yeah.
That's very, very good, very interesting. I just want to bring a question in from one of the guys watching online, Yasir on Facebook. I don't know if you can. I don't know if your system shows you the comments as well.
No, it doesn't. Oh, maybe it does.
So,
oh yeah, I see it.
Yasir said, I learned a lot about business watching movies about the mob. I mean, I guess. I guess your bio's up on the Facebook here as well for anybody who's joined late. But Leonard's background is as you know, someone who was in a gang in his younger years, and has you know, turned that frustration into positive energy, and is a very successful entrepreneur, author, you know, multiple business owner right now. I mean, what kind of lessons would you say, you know, following on from your comment about the mob? You know, what kind of
if I'm honest with you, I wouldn't say that if I'm looking back at my younger years, it wasn't as organized. But I would definitely say that I've learned a lot from watching mob movies, and the organization and the structure and the discipline and the hierarchy of their operations. Not the actual distribution of what it is, but there are a lot of ethics outside of the internal ethics amongst the organizations. And if you look at America, it's built by the mob. So it's undeniable to say that there are not things that can be learned from the infrastructure and the arrangement of some of these organizations. However, it's not just that. I think everyone has a bit you can learn from. You can learn from Mike Tyson, who was a heavyweight champion, and look at his discipline. You can learn from Leonardo DiCaprio, who does method acting. There's so many elements you can take from people, but it's not just about learning. It's about what can you actually take and apply to your life. If you're going to learn from the mob, what specifically can you apply into your life? What is that a characteristic? Is that a discipline? Is that an efficiency? Is that they build it? I mean, I love the fact that the mob were able to have a vision to go into Vegas and build that into a city which now is owned by the Mormons, but it initiated through the mob. So it was more than the crime. It was actually a lot of expansion and diversification in their operation, which someone like the Trump, I remember watching recently that the Trump also went on to license his name to them, the Italian mobs I'm talking about. So yeah, I think there is a lot of, there's a lot that can be learned through everyone. Humans are the biggest, teacher in general, but it's about what specific part of their characteristic you can apply to yourself. Because there are some things that the mob could do that I would just wouldn't, I wouldn't do.
100%. I talk about this a lot. When I'm talking to people about finding mentors, and and people ask, where do I go and find one, or who should I find? And and for me, like you say, it's very much about finding the right people for the right circumstances, and or for the right teaching lessons, let's say, and that's that. What you should certainly not be doing is excluding the good from people or from teaching experiences just because of some of the bad, some of the bad in there. If you want to learn tennis, for example, then you want to go and have the best person to teach you that tennis. That doesn't mean that same person's qualified to teach you about football or business or ethics or mathematics or whatever it may be. But it's about like you say, taking the right lessons, learning from the people that you resonate with you, and then applying them to your specific situations.
Because me personally, Matt, I've always been intrigued with leaders, and was one thing I did find myself, especially at a time when I first started the business, I never had examples of this being a cool thing to do. I think when I was 18, the likes of Richard Branson and Alan Sugar were more the figures of entrepreneurism, so it was more of a senior thing. So for me, especially coming from the adversities I had gone through, one of the things I did to neutralize a lot of my feelings towards what I'd gone through was reading about great leaders like the Napoleon Bonapartes and the Alexander the Greats, and I've always been intrigued with generals and how they've been able to lead armies and soldiers to conquer and to strategize takeovers of countries. And I think one of the great things about generals that have lived before us is that you can see a lot of traits in how they've been able to persuade and lead people. I even read the Hitler book to understand how he managed to convince a whole country to behave in such a way. So I think life is about being subjective. Even if the views are against what you believe, there's always something you can understand more, and there's always something, and especially if it's history is really, I mean, there are parts that are a lie, but there are still evidence as to someone got away with doing that. But understanding the how can be something that you can use for your company that you're doing one day, and being a stronger leader in that format for good, as opposed to for bad. So yeah, that was something that I've always been.
And just let's talk a little bit about the current situation. I mean, how's your business been affected by Corona? I mean, you're an online business anyway, so I guess were you already reasonably adapted, or have you got
not really because now I think now for my business, my goal is to create more value. And I've realized that over the past, year or two, a lot of people have become a lot more prone to learning online and really wanting to get more than, information or more than networking. A lot of people want to understand firsthand how they can improve their sales skills, how they can improve their confidence, and how they can really, put their brand or their business in a much more stronger position. So what we've been doing, of course, is advancing some of the services we provide with MYCOMEUP. So we are introducing a learning platform within the platform, which is going to enable people to actually take and be part of groups and courses which are designed to helping them to increase their clarity, financial stability, and also give them some guidelines on how they can apply and improve their personal growth. So what we've been doing is actually working on giving more value and creating more of a support and an intimate experience, as opposed to just leaving it as a social network. So over the next coming month, we're going to be introducing the e-learning element of the platform, which I feel like is going to be a great thing for people that have either been out of work for a while and lost confidence, or for those that have businesses that really want to understand how they can generate new leads, how they can assume the position of clarity in their life, and at the same time learn from coaches and support people that are there for them along the journey.
Fantastic. Well, listen, it's been fantastic having you here, buddy. I mean, for the guys at home, do you want to give yourself a little plug of where they can find you if they want to hear more, where they can find your book, and find you on YouTube, etc.?
Yeah, you can find me online on Instagram, which is at leonardsekyonda.com. That's LeonardSekyonda. I'm also on YouTube. If you search Leonard Sekyonda, I have vlogs, I have podcasts that are on there. You can go to leonardsekyonda.com to keep updated. I'm on MyComeUp as well, MyComeUp.com, if you search my name inside the platform. And on Amazon, you can search Leonard Sekyonda, Become Your Own Hero Again, and get a copy of my book. And I can assure you that it will help you with the principles as well as the actual exercises to create more structure and just create more clarity. And I'm always here for feedback and for any questions that you have around the book or some of the topics I talk about.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thanks again, Leonard, and thanks for taking time out during what is undoubtedly a busy time for a busy guy. So I appreciate you being here, mate.
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate you having me on your show. Love what you're doing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.